Hi everyone, I just got Split Fiction for the Nintendo Switch 2 and I can't wait to take this game and put it in my console and just start playing. And I'm gonna do it right now. And is there a slot? I forgot. Yeah, so it's a bit of a horse that's been beaten to death multiple times at this point, but I kind of wanted to talk about physical, and digital games on the Nintendo Switch 2 because coincidentally I had been thinking about this, and Ubisoft just launched Star Wars Outlaws this week, and they made a statement as to why their game is on a game key card instead of coming on a full cartridge that contains the entire game. Especially considering, Star Wars Outlaws is about a 20 gigabyte game, I believe, and the Switch 2 cards are 64 gigabytes, so people were a little skeptical of that. And it's been a whole conversation every time a new game comes out, specifically a third-party game. And yeah, I have some thoughts and some things I want to put out there. This is not going to be like a very flashy video, but I just kind of wanted to talk about this. So let's get started. So the whole thing with game key cards brought about a discussion about physical versus digital in a way that we haven't really had before, because up until now, it felt like things were a lot more black and white. You have physical games, you buy them from the store, and you can put that in your system and you can play it. Or you have digital games which you buy on the eShop, and sometimes physical games at stores would be just download codes that unlock the digital version of the game. Game key cards change this paradigm a little bit because they are cards that still contain the license for the game, and that license, unlike the digital codes, it can be used as many times as you want, as long as you have that card inside the system. That system can play the game that is associated with that game card. With the digital download code, you download that game and you have to go into the eShop to input that code. And so that license for that game is tied to your eShop account, your Nintendo account. And only you can play it, or someone with your account. So that game can't be resold, and it can't really be loaned to someone else unless they're in your Nintendo Switch family group, where you can just lend the digital license, the virtual game card now, to someone else. But that's still not quite as flexible as just lending a physical item to someone else. A lot of people had problems with game key cards from the very beginning, but I've actually been quite in favor of them, because I do think that a lot of the value of these physical releases is the ability to resell and lend these games to someone else easily, and the fact that the license isn't tied to the eShop itself. It doesn't matter if you don't redeem it within a certain time or something. And that's something that I want to get into a little bit, because there are different things to consider when you look at how these things work. Let's talk about the Wii, for example. The Wii came out in 2006, and I believe the Wii Shop channel, where you could buy digital games on the Wii, that shut down in 2019, so 13 years, give or take. However, if you already own Wii Shop channel games, today you can still get on the internet and download those titles and just get them on your system again, as long as your console is working, right? Because at the time, Nintendo didn't have a proper account system. Things are just tied to your console, and if it breaks, then all of your games or digital games will be gone. That's a big problem, obviously, but the point here is that the servers are still there. You can still go on the Wii Shop channel and download those files. And that's a pretty big takeaway, because it's been almost 20 years now since the Wii Shop channel first opened, and it's been shut down for a while. But your licenses and your rights to play those games are still being upheld. So one of the big arguments for physical games is obviously preservation, because the eShops do go down eventually, and you're not in control of it. And I totally understand, and I totally side with you on that. I want to have a license. Like, if I buy a product, I want to be able to use it indefinitely, as long as it's in my possession physically. I want to be able to use it. Like, that just makes sense. That's how buying things has always worked, and that's how it should work. And we just kind of live in a different reality now, where buying things doesn't really make them yours. Like with the digital era, like, you're always kind of dependent on the fact that the company who distributes these products is going to uphold that license for you. And yeah, that kind of sucks, obviously, like that's a concern for people. That being said though, I do think game keycards do bring a big improvement to this. Obviously, on top of the fact that you can lend the game or sell it off to someone else, this also means that you're never going to be dependent on the eShop itself being open. So like the way that the Wii Shop channel closed, but you can still download games if you own them, it seems to me like with the game keycards, as long as you have the card, there's a very, very good chance that the servers for downloading that software will be available for a whole lot longer, maybe indefinitely, for you to download that title and to keep playing it. And you can just do that whenever, because the license is always tied to the card. It's not tied to your account, it's not tied to anyone's Nintendo account. You just need the card and then you're able to play that game as long as you download it, which you should be able to do for a very long time. So to me, that is an improvement over the digital codes, because it's not single use and it's more likely to be available for a long time. Because if you buy a used, like you can't really buy like a code for Split Fiction, for example, like I showed here. Like you can buy it 10 years from now, maybe on eBay, someone's selling the code, but there is a chance that the eShop won't be running anymore. But there's a chance that even if the eShop is down, the servers as a whole are still functional. And so if you have a game keycard, you have the benefit of still being able to download that game without needing the eShop itself. But again, I get it. Like this is still a server, it can still shut down, you don't have the control. And I do prefer physical games, but I'm just saying that I think game keycards are an improvement over what we had before in terms of selling digital games. And then you also have to consider what physical games actually are and how permanent they truly are. Because here's the thing, a lot of these owned games, you can say like, I have a bunch of owned Game Boy games that are 30 plus years old probably at this point. Wait, yeah, 30 plus years old. They still work. It's very finicky though, and I have to like change the batteries in them for the saves to work. And with discs, I've had things where like I bought a Nintendo Land disc for the Wii U and it just wasn't working. I don't know if it was scratched or what, but the thing with physical media is that it also doesn't last forever. People have been reporting things like disc rot for like PlayStation games or PlayStation 2 games. And these really old games for older consoles, they still go bad even if they're physical. And if you want to talk about preservation, which is an angle that is often brought up when it comes to physical media versus digital media, I don't know that physical media is actually doing much for preservation in the sense of keeping those games playable. Like what really keeps these games playable is actually just the fans backing up these files as ROMs and making them available online, which yeah, is not legal in the sense that we would like it to be. And I'm not in favor of emulation for like modern platforms, but yeah, for old consoles, emulation and this distribution of ROMs, this is how games are truly preserved. This is the only way that you can truly play them today, like a lot of these. Because even if they still function and are technically available somewhere out there in the world, you can't really reasonably expect to buy one of these games now and actually play it. So the physical copies, we use this argument of preservation sometimes, and I don't think it actually applies here, because one way or the other, these physical copies are also going to go away at some point. And the thing is, the technology for storing games, because it's getting more advanced and there's more storage, and the way the technology works is actually a bit different, there's actually an increased chance that your games will stop functioning earlier than they used to. Like the Switch 2 games, the type of storage that they use to put games on cards, if you don't keep those cards active every now and then, that data could disappear within 10, 15 years, or like it could not be readable properly in a few years anyway. The physical cards could actually die before the servers for the game key cards go down. So you have to consider that, like, in terms of preservation, I don't actually know for sure that having a physical copy of a game is a huge benefit that is going to keep that game in your possession for as long as you live. It's always a bit of a gamble, physical games are not permanent as much as you like it to be. And it's a really haunting realization. I thought about this a lot, and it was actually a little bit depressing when the Switch 2 was coming out and all this drama with game keycards was happening. Like I was processing this as best as I could. Like I just kind of had to accept that like physical games are still not going to last forever. One of these days I could put one of my 3DS games in my console and maybe it just won't work anymore. And there's really nothing I can do about that. So the servers or the physical cards, neither of them is gonna last forever, most likely. And yeah, so the big benefit of the cards is that at least like you can kind of only blame yourself when it's something that you have in your hands. And when it's a server, you're just more likely to be like, oh, why did they shut this down? Like it just allows you to put the blame on someone else, but realistically, there's not much of a difference. And so I've just kind of accepted that when I like collecting physical things, it isn't so much for the permanence of the game itself, because eventually that preservation of the game is going to be entirely up to digital formats and unofficial distribution. I think having physical games is cool because I like having them visible on my shelf. I think, and that's okay too. Like I know there's a lot of people who prefer digital because, oh, putting games in cases is just a waste of plastic, like it's just destroying the environment. And that's also a completely valid argument. If you don't want to support that, and you are completely in your right to do so. But to me, I love having these things on my shelf. I love that people can walk into my office and see that like this is a big part of my life. Like we are, like, as sad as that kind of sounds, and like my identity is sort of tied to these things. Like we're all defined by the things that we choose to do at the end of the day. And like I love video games. I love playing them and I love having them. And having all of this stuff that I can show off on my shelf is different. It just hits in a different way than having a bunch of screens that I can scroll by to show everyone the games that I have. Like no one wants to see that. Like you're not going to call your friends to look at your screen and scroll through your Steam library. Like having your games physical, that it gives you that there's something to that, right? There's a tangibility to having those games that just makes it feel more significant. It feels like it's actually an important part of your life because it's taking physical space in your home or wherever you keep them, I guess. So I really like that part about owning physical games, and I still prefer that. But in that sense, I do think that the game keycards serve the exact same purpose. I can have a case and I have a game card, and that game card has the license to play the game that I bought. And I can put it in my system, and yeah, I have to do a download first, and that's very annoying, I get that. But at least the game is playable. It might be even playable for longer than an actual physical game. I can still lend it, I can still resell it if I don't want it anymore. Like, it all just still works for like the foreseeable future. I don't think for the next 10 or 20 years, these games are going to become unavailable. I really don't think so, because I feel like preservation is just going to become more important over time. And so this is okay. It's not the ideal scenario, of course, but I think game keycards are not as bad as a lot of people make them out to be. If there isn't like a true physical release of a game, I will still prefer that, but I think game keycards are okay. Now, is there a solution to game keycards that could actually just get rid of them? That will be up to Nintendo. I think they can come up with a solution, but let's explore the options right now, because I think there's some interesting approaches that we've already seen. So I mentioned BioShock Collection earlier, and I think that is already a cool example where parts of the game are on the card and just download the rest. But I think a better example is actually Shadow Labyrinth, Nintendo Switch 2 edition. So Shadow Labyrinth came out earlier this year. It's like a Pac-Man game, but it's a platformer thing, side-scroll or something, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it because I haven't played that much of it yet. But what I really like about it is that it does have a Nintendo Switch 2 edition, but the Switch 2 edition didn't get a physical release, which is interesting. But also, the physical Switch edition for the Switch 1, you can just put that in your Switch 2, you go on the eShop, and you can download the upgrade pack for the Switch 2 edition for free. So what does this mean? It means that if you put this game on your console, whether it's a Switch 1 or Switch 2, you can play the game immediately. Like, the game is playable, it functions perfectly fine, and it just works. Like, it's the game that you bought, and it's there, and it works. And then if you want to have the best experience, you just download the latest updates, you download the upgrade pack, and then you have the Switch 2 edition available to you. And I think that is actually, from what we've seen so far, it's probably one of the best approaches yet, because you have the game, you bought the game, you have the license to play it offline, whatever you want, it's there. It's always functional. As long as the card works, you can play that game. It's not the best version of the game, that's true, but the game is playable and it's yours. The only thing you're depending on the internet for is to have the higher quality visuals and performance. And that is, I think, probably the best compromise so far. Like, you know, the company doesn't need to spend a whole lot of money on a Switch 2 card that's way more expensive, but you still get a fully playable game. You just need to go to the internet to get the best version of that. And I think that's acceptable. You know, it's not ideal, but it is probably the best that we have yet in terms of implementing this. But that only really works for games that work both on the Switch 1 and the Switch 2. So then you look at something like what Ubisoft just mentioned with Star Wars Outlaws, where the reason why they don't use a physical game card with entire data on it is because the game cards for the Switch 2 are actually the slowest means of reading data on the Switch 2. And this is something that Nintendo actually acknowledges. If you played Switch 2 Welcome Tour, they mentioned this, that game cards are the slowest of the means of reading and writing data for the Switch 2 as a whole. You have the microSD Express cards, which are significantly faster, and then you have the internal storage on the Switch 2, which is slightly faster than even that. So the speeds of the game key cards were not fast enough for the way that Star Wars Outlaws is designed, and it couldn't read data fast enough to generate all the scenarios that you see in that game. So this opens up a whole other challenge with, you know, physical games on the Switch 2, where if the game card reading speeds are not fast enough to bring over all these games from the PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X and S, when these games are designed around the fast reading speeds of an SSD, what are you gonna do? The game just isn't going to run off of the card in an acceptable condition. So digital is like the only way to go. You have to have that game stored on your microSD Express card or the internal storage of the console. And the solution, I think, is for Nintendo to make some changes to the way these cards work. So obviously you can increase the speeds, that's not what I mean. I think what Nintendo needs to do is something that other consoles have been doing for a long time and require installs. Like, if the data fits on a card, put the game on the card, but if it's too slow, instead of just playing it off of the card, you can just copy the data from the card onto the console. Maybe you still require you to put the card in, which is the same with game key cards anyway, so that's fine. But you just copy the data onto the console, it takes the same space on your system, and you play it off of there, but at least everything is available offline, so you can put that card in any console, and at any point without internet, you can just copy the data from the card into the Switch 2's storage, and you just play it like that. To me, that is the thing that Nintendo needs to do, and I think ideally what they could consider even doing is do this with Switch 1 type of cards, because if the Switch 2 cards, you know, they're only available in 64GB sizes, and I know that's a criticism that people levy against Nintendo, but I actually don't think Nintendo has a whole lot of solutions in that regard, just because I believe that the type of storage being used for the game key cards is very dependent on having this higher capacity. Like, it's very hard. If it's an SSD type storage, like flash storage, you don't really see SSDs smaller than 128GB normally. So having the 64GB card is probably the bare minimum Nintendo can do for this to be viable at all. And it's already super expensive, right? That's the whole thing. That's the reason that people believe these game key cards are a thing in the first place, is that the physical game cards are super expensive. So I don't think it's actually possible to make a Switch 2 game card that's smaller. But you could use a Switch 1 game card, which go up to 32 gigabytes, I believe. Just use one of those. It's gonna make the installs if you need to copy data from the card onto the Switch 2. Like, that's gonna take a while, so the install is going to be a little annoying. But that data is all right there. You can just copy it, and that way you have a cheaper card for the game makers, so they can just buy a cheaper card and still have the game in a physical format. The owners of the game, the people who buy the game, can still just have access to it at any time. You don't need internet, you don't need licenses. It's just your game on that card with all the data in there. Like, that to me is the ideal solution. It lowers costs for physical versions of the game, but it keeps them available to owners. It sucks a little bit, obviously, having to install it, but at least you're installing it from a medium that you have full control over. And that would be the preferable solution. Is that going to happen? Honestly, I could kind of see it. Nintendo, I think, has been listening to all the criticism about this. I don't think they're actually as, tone deaf as people seem to think they are. Sometimes they do seem to live in their own bubble and not listen. But I think they're not oblivious to the criticism here. And I do think as an update or something, they could just tell developers like, hey, you can start doing things this way. Like, and they could have this in the direct, like, oh, starting today or with this upcoming update, you'll be able to copy data from your game card onto your system so you can play that game, just with faster loading speeds or whatever. Like, I think they could make an announcement like that. And if they can include like Switch 1 style game cards in that scheme and just make that work, that would be amazing, because then that would give an avenue for cheaper games that do still run on the Switch 1. Like, say, if Hollow Knight Silksong were to release in a physical format, they wouldn't have to make a Switch 2 game card. They could just buy the Switch 1 game card with the Switch 2 data, and you just copy that onto the Switch 2's internal storage and run it off of the internal storage. Like, something like that. I think that could work totally fine. But the biggest point here is, please stop doing digital codes in boxes. Like, this is not a physical game. This is truly not a physical game. It's not. It's gonna be tied to my account forever. I can't lend this to someone else. Like, please don't do this. At the very least, do the game key cards. I much prefer that, because if I'm gonna do a digital code, I would rather just buy it on the eShop. Well, obviously I didn't, but it was a promotion, that's different. But please, game key cards at the very least. But yeah, there's solutions that are possible. I think the game key cards right now are the best option, but I do think also Nintendo can improve things by just making it possible to install games from the game card onto the system. That's been a thing that other consoles have done for a long time, because discs are notoriously pretty slow to read. So most games right now, I believe, on PlayStation and wherever, you already need to install them from the disc onto the console storage. It's a standard. Like, Nintendo can obviously do it too. I'm sure they can. So yeah, please make that happen. And if you can, just, do it with Switch 1 game cards so cheaper games can still exist. And yeah, that is really like kind of all I had to say. That's a long rant, but yeah, I just, game key cards are okay. Physical games are better. Digital codes in box are kind of stupid. I don't know why this still exists. And Nintendo can do better, so let's hope that they do. There's supposed to be a Direct next week, so who knows, maybe they'll mention something about that there. But yeah, that's pretty much all for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!